They say history is written by the victors. But what if the victors buried the truth? What if the greatest crime ever committed on American soil isn't in your school books, isn't in your documentaries, and isn't even acknowledged by the very country that committed it? What if the nation built on the idea of liberty and justice for all was also built on the bones of millions? This is the story of the Native American genocide. A story so dark, so painful, so deliberately erased that even uttering it feels like a rebellion. But it's time to speak it, loud, clear, and without apology. Before the first European ship reached the shores of the Americas, this land was already thriving. The continent was not a vast, untouched wilderness. It was full of life, full of people. Scholars estimate that between 60 to 100 million indigenous people lived across North and South America. In what is now the United States alone, there were over 500 distinct tribes, each with their own languages, governance systems, spiritual beliefs, and trade networks. The Iroquois Confederacy had a sophisticated democratic system that Benjamin Franklin admired and borrowed from. The Mississippian civilization built massive cities with pyramids and trade routes that stretched thousands of miles. The Pueblones, the Sioux, the Lenape, the Lakota, these were not primitive savages. They were nations, sophisticated, resilient, rich in culture and wisdom. But then came colonization, and with it came disease, war, displacement, and ultimately genocide. Let's not sugarcoat it. The first wave of destruction came in the form of microbes, smallpox, measles, influenza, European diseases that indigenous immune systems had never encountered. Within a century of contact, some areas saw 90% of their population wiped out. In many cases, this wasn't accidental. There are documented instances of British and later American military officers deliberately infecting native people with smallpox using blankets as bioweapons. This wasn't just passive spread, it was calculated biological warfare. And when disease wasn't enough, violence followed. From the moment settlers landed, the hunger for land, more land, never stopped. Colonists declared native land as unused if it wasn't fenced or plowed, ignoring millennia of sustainable indigenous stewardship. And as colonies grew, indigenous people were pushed further west, often through deception, broken treaties, or outright violence. Let's talk about those treaties. Over 500 treaties were signed between the United States government and native nations. Nearly every single one of them was broken. The U.S. Constitution refers to tribes as sovereign nations, but in practice that sovereignty was routinely violated. Lands promised in perpetuity were seized within years. Treaties that guaranteed peace were followed by massacres. The ink of agreement had barely dried before armies and settlers pushed through, taking what they wanted. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act. It authorized the forced relocation of tens of thousands of Native Americans from their ancestral homelands in the southeastern U.S. to Indian Territory, west of the Mississippi, present-day Oklahoma. What followed was one of the most brutal and tragic episodes in American history, the Trail of Tears. Families were rounded up at gunpoint, their homes burned, their belongings stolen or abandoned. Forced to walk over 1,000 miles through swamps, rivers, snow, and disease, an estimated 60,000 Native people were displaced. More than 15 Zalozan died on the journey, children, elders, mothers carrying infants. Their bodies often left unburied, frozen by the roadside. And this wasn't an accident. The U.S. Army executed this operation with chilling precision. They knew many would die. They simply didn't care. But it didn't stop there. The 19th century brought wave after wave of violence as the United States expanded westward under the banner of manifest destiny, the belief that America was divinely ordained to stretch from coast to coast. But that vision didn't include native lives. The U.S. military engaged in over 500 armed conflicts with native tribes, more than with any other nation in its history. These weren't wars, they were extermination campaigns. The Sand Creek Massacre in 1864. A Colorado militia attacked a peaceful Cheyenne and Arapaho village. Over 230 people, mostly women, children, and elderly, were butchered. Pregnant women were cut open. Infants were killed in front of their mothers. Soldiers paraded back to Denver with body parts displayed on sticks. The U.S. Army called it a great victory. Then came Wounded Knee in 1890. The Lakota were trying to practice the ghost dance, a spiritual movement of hope and resistance. The U.S. government saw it as rebellion. Troops opened fire on a camp of mostly unarmed Lakota. Over 300 men, women, and children were slaughtered. Frozen corpses were found days later in the snow. The government handed out 20 medals of honor to the soldiers who carried out the massacre. Let that sink in. This wasn't just violence, it was celebrated. But the most insidious part of the genocide wasn't just death, it was cultural erasure. In the late 1800s, a new tactic emerged: assimilation through education. Native children were forcibly taken from their families and sent to boarding schools, institutions run by Christian churches with the full backing of the U.S. government. They were stripped of their names, their clothes, their languages, their culture. They were beaten for speaking their native tongue, shamed for their beliefs. Many were sexually abused. Many never saw their families again. The motto of these schools: kill the Indian, save the man. Thousands of children died in these schools. their bodies buried in unmarked graves. And for decades, no one talked about it. Only in recent years have these graves been uncovered, hundreds of tiny skeletons finally telling the truth that silence buried. Even today, the trauma of this system echoes. Generations of indigenous families were torn apart, languages lost, traditions erased, identity shattered. And still, America celebrates Thanksgiving, paints over this horror with images of pilgrims and hand turkeys. Even now, Hollywood glorifies cowboys, vilifies natives, and erases the truth. Even now, high schools use native mascots and racist chants as if genocide is a costume. Even now, textbooks refer to Indian removal as a policy of relocation, not forced displacement. But here's the truth: the U.S. government systematically attempted to wipe indigenous peoples from existence through warfare, starvation, forced sterilization, disease, displacement, and assimilation. This wasn't a tragedy. It was a genocide, and it's ongoing. Today, Native communities face some of the highest rates of poverty, suicide, and incarceration in the country. Access to clean water, healthcare, and education is limited. Many reservations are treated like third-world nations. By design, Native women are murdered or go missing at rates 10 times higher than the national average. Law enforcement barely investigates. The land continues to be exploited, sacred sites desecrated, treaties ignored. Just ask the water protectors at Standing Rock, who were met with militarized police and tear gas while defending the very land guaranteed to them by treaty. But here's what they don't tell you: Native people never stopped fighting. They're still here, still resisting, still preserving languages once thought lost, still practicing ceremonies once outlawed, still organizing, voting, writing, building, surviving. They have endured the unendurable. That's not just survival, that's power. And now, finally, their stories are being told. But not enough, because until we teach this truth in every classroom, until we remove the statues of genocidal leaders, until we replace racist mascots with honest memorials, until we return stolen land, then America cannot call itself free. Because freedom built on genocide is not freedom. It's illusion, it's silence. And silence is violence. So the next time someone tells you to get over it, ask them why America still hasn't faced it. Ask them why the genocide of Native Americans isn't common knowledge. Ask them why they're so afraid of the truth. Because the truth is this: the United States was built on stolen land by stolen lives with stolen futures. And yet, Native people remain proud, unbroken. They are not gone. They were never defeated. The only thing that was defeated was the lie. So if this story moved you, don't just scroll away. Share it, teach it, speak it. Because remembering is the first step to justice, and silence ends the